go. We are a changed people.
Okay. Well, I am going to start trying. I'm going to call it travel.
We remember.
Thank you, Pat. And now I just did want to remind you on the recording that to stop your video also if you don't want your video recorded as well. So that's just a reminder. But now what I'd like to do is turn it over to Norlin Piongaro for our program. Norlin.
Welcome, everyone. We have a wonderful program with vital interest. Sure that we can, I'm going to mute. Ignoring in so that we can hear our presenters very clearly. So if you would please make sure that you are muted, that will help us be able to hear our wonderful speakers clearly. We chose in our program planning committee the topic of equity because we feel that it is the burning issue for our country and also for our organization this year. And equity for us means, of course, inclusivity and diversity. And we feel that if we're practicing equity, it will lead to inclusivity and diversity. This was just a unanimous decision that we reached very quickly. And so all of our programs this year will attempt to develop that theme of equity, diversity, inclusivity. And there is no better person to introduce our speakers than our board member, Rochelle Smar, who is, as you all know, an EDD candidate. She's working on her doctorate at Cal State San Marcos. She is in charge of college university relations and also in charge of diversity. So she has dual roles on our board. And she will introduce our speakers and take care of our program. Rochelle?
Thank you, Norlin, for that wonderful, wonderful welcome. And I am just thrilled to kind of co-host this opportunity to welcome Dr. Wendy Stewart and my colleague, Sarah Sandoval, for the conversation on equity in education this morning. We're going to start with Dr. Wendy Stewart, and I'm not sure if everyone has it, so I'm just going to go ahead and put it in the chat, but it's a link to the Del Mar chapter website where they have a flyer of the two speakers. And I'm just going to share a brief bio for Dr. Wendy Stewart, and then she's going to come behind me and present for about 25 minutes, and then I'll come back again and introduce Sarah Sandoval as well. So Dr. Wendy Stewart, as you can probably see from her bio, and as I was reading it, I was getting more and more excited, like, oh, this is a good possible mentor. So Dr. Stewart is out there. Either way, Dr. Stewart has worked in the field of higher education for over 25 years. She currently serves as the Dean of Counseling and Student Development at Mar-Leucadia College, where she oversees a portfolio of programs that include student accessibility services, service learning, student equity, and academic success and equity programs. She serves as the campus-wide leader, contributing to institutional change and long-term planning, in addition to efforts to close the equity gap for disproportionately impacted students. Just this past year during the pandemic, she co-founded Mar-Leucadia College Black Community Ally Training, which serves as the first of one of its kind campus-based trainings in the state of California. She earned her Bachelor of Arts in Literature Writing from the University of California, San Diego, a Master of Science in Counseling with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy from San Diego University, and a doctorate in educational leadership from USC. She also holds professional certificates from the Institute of Management, Leadership, and Education from Harvard University, and in diversity and inclusion from Cornell University. She's also received awards for leadership and education from Phi Delta Kappa and the Salute to Women Award from North County NAACP for her leadership in the region. She's a co-founder of the nonprofit Lucky Box Project, providing new household items for San Diego County families transitioning out of homelessness. in partnership with Operation Hope. She's a lifetime member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and serves on the executive board of San Diego Alumni Chapter. Please welcome me in introducing Dr. Wendy Stewart. Welcome.
Thank you, Rochelle. I feel like I need somebody to read my bio every morning when I get up, you know, when you hear it and hear those things read, right? It's a different kind of encouragement. So I want to bring warm welcome, a warm greetings to the ladies of AAUW, the American Association of University Women. I'm really honored to be here to talk to you this morning, tell you a little bit about what's happening at Mar-Leucadia, and then talk just in general about equity efforts around diversity and inclusion, specifically as it relates to women, and then also some of our equity efforts as it relates to our students of color. And I want to bring greetings on behalf of our Superintendent President, Dr. Sunny Cook. She had a conflict and couldn't be here this morning, but I know she was really excited that I had the opportunity to talk to everybody. I've worked at Mar-Leucadia, just a little bit about me, for over 10 years. I actually celebrated my 10-year anniversary in the last couple of weeks. I heard when I entered the room talk about homeschooling, and so I'm a mother of an extremely energetic and constantly moving 8-year-old boy who I'm hoping will be super quiet for the next 25 minutes, but we'll see who's in the other room. I am a wife, I'm an educator, and I'm also really committed to being active in the community. So this organization and the work that you do holds a really close part of my heart, because I think that when we can impact our community, we're not just working to make a change ourselves, but also spreading that love and making an impact really on what's happening in the future. I want to start with a quote that is something that is really central to the work that I do as an educator, and I think speaks to when we talk about equity. And it's a quote by Nelson Mandela: "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." And I think that's a core value that I hold as an educator, is that I'm not just in the business of being a dean and working with students because I want to make an impact locally to Mar-Leucadia or even to Oceanside or North County. It's really about change, right? And I think Norland captured it, that equity is a burning issue for our nation right now, because I don't know that we've ever seen more change that has happened in our country than we've seen in these past years. And I would even say we're in a place where we're seeing more polarizing issues, right? Teaching tolerance and how to connect with people who are different from you now is more important than ever. But in order to understand how I came to be an educator, I have to take a minute, especially when I'm in the presence of women who are really committed to making an impact in the lives of girls and women, to just pay homage to my mother and my grandmother, because I feel like there's a statistic that I was reading that when you educate women, you educate families, and you create education as a value across families. And that's really something that I grew up with. I grew up with education. You hear from a lot of our first generation students who will say, I don't know if I pictured myself in college. No one really pushed education maybe in my life because maybe people didn't have exposure to it. I feel like I was born and my grandmother and my mother leaned over the crib and said, "You will go to college," because it's been instilled in me from an early age. But I've also understood where that passion and that desire came from, that for Black women my grandmother was a nurse and received her nursing degree in the 50s. My mother was one of the early Black students who attended what is today Cal State Los Angeles, but at that time was Los Angeles College. Both of them talked about how education has always been critical, but was a challenge, especially for Black women. My grandmother was a nurse, not by choice, but because that was the only educational option that was available for a lot of women, and then especially for Black women. And my mom, who sewed our curtains, our clothes, she made everything in our house by hand. She was masterful with a sewing machine. I remember like designer outfits that people would wear to school that would cost a ton of money, and people would ask, oh, where did you get that from? And I would not disclose it, but it was homemade. My mom, made all of our outfits, and we were like the flyest kids going to school. And that's because she always had a passion for fashion and for design, but was really told in college that that's not for you as a Black woman, that being a nurse or a teacher, that those are your tracks. And we know that a lot of women of color, a lot of women were given that message early on. So they instilled in me that going to college was not just a necessity for me in terms of what they had wishes for me, but also that their expectation was for me to take that legacy with me and to have an understanding that when I'm choosing my major, so I chose a lot of majors in college and landed on literature finally, to their great relief, and so that I could graduate. But just the fact that I could change my major a lot of times, I understood was something that my mother and my grandmother didn't have the option to do. So I bring that into this work as an educator. And I think when I'm working with other girls and women, especially in understanding that there's a legacy that we have in education, there are some positives to that. And then there's some pieces where we still see some of the same trends that are happening today. So in prepping for this, I definitely looked at, okay, I want to share some statistics about what's happening at Mar-Leucadia, but also talk about higher education and women in higher education. And I have to say, those are those moments when you feel both energized, but also a little disappointed, because the statistics especially in STEM don't look different than when I was in school, don't look different when you go decades past, right? There's still a disproportionate impact and disparities for women in some areas. So there's some good news in terms of the work that we're doing. And I want to get folks fired up about the good work that Mar-Leucadia and other institutions are doing on diversity, equity, inclusion. But it's always important that we remind ourselves we're doing this work in the face of trends and disparities that have not changed, at least in my opinion, have not changed fast enough, right? Given the things that our country is facing. So at Mar-Leucadia, equity has really been a central part of the institution. I think it's one of the reasons that I truly love working there, because I can center my value in equity and in making a difference and ensuring that all students succeed regardless of your background, regardless of what race or ethnicity you are, regardless of your gender identity, regardless of your background. If you come to us to succeed and how you have an educational vision, we can make that happen. And that is, realistically speaking, not the case. It's not the case at our campus, and it's not the case across higher education. There's a lot of benefits and a lot of improvements we've made, but higher education is still not a place where you can say it's for every single student, that students come and don't face barriers. So just a little bit of data. There's been major shifts in higher education, especially in the last 10 years. There are more women in higher education than there are men. And Mar-Leucadia has been 60% women, and this is identified women. I want to own that we are in a space where we have folks who identify as non-binary, that gender identity definitely is more fluid than it has been before. So for the sake of this, I'm going to talk about men and women in a binary way, but I want to own that there are those that fall outside of that category. But Mar-Leucadia is 60% female and has been around 60% female for the past 5 years. And that's a trend that exists in higher education. So you would assume if there are more women in colleges and universities, that we would start to see some of the data change, especially when we're talking about STEM fields. But the reality is that women still only make up about 28% of the workforce when we're talking about STEM. And we know there's a lot of reasons for that. There's still gender stereotypes in fields related to science, technology, engineering, and math. It is still viewed in many spaces as a male-dominated field. There are fewer role models. So I think about how my mother and my grandmother instilled education in me from a young age and really served as role models. And that's powerful, I think, for women, because you're going to be in spaces